Well, good morning, everybody. This is Pastor Jay, and I'm coming to you, excuse me, from Cornerstone Church. And we are here today to do our Tuesday Digging Deeper devotional. And all this week, we're digging deeper into Acts chapter 11, using the story of Peter and Cornelius and the resulting effects of that meeting on the church as our springboard into a discussion of new thing thinking. So yesterday, we went over the basic points of the meeting about all the shifts that new thing thinking brings. And we read some scriptures regarding new thing thinking and what Jesus had to say about new thing thinking in the Gospels, particularly as it speaks to the New Testament coming in to fulfill the Old Testament. So let's just look at one of these passages and then make some comments on it. So in Matthew chapter 9, starting in verse 14, John's disciples approach Jesus, and they ask him, "How is it that we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?" Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast. But no one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making the tear worse. Neither do people pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst, the new wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved." So Jesus is using a metaphor here to explain to the disciples of John that what is coming and the fasting that is coming, and the mourning that is coming, and the prayer that is coming, and everything that is coming is going to be so new that the old forms of fasting, the old reasons for fasting, the old ideas of prayer are going to be confronted by the very newness of what is about to be established. And as we, the church, come into new thing thinking, we should already really be here, because we are the New Testament. We have been in the New Testament for 2,000 years now. Unfortunately, there's this temptation, just like the Jews were experiencing in the book of Acts, to fall back into Old Testament thinking and to get stuck in that. Now, in their day, in their defense, New Testament thinking was truly new. It was totally revelational and revolutionary to think about including the Gentiles in the community of God. That had never been the case in the Old Testament. If Gentiles wanted to become part of the community, they could become a part of a very small part of the community. They couldn't join the whole community. They could only be accepted by a small segment of the community. And they were still considered second-class citizens, even in that sort of acceptance. However, here in the New Testament, Jesus has changed things so that being the chosen people of God now means something totally different than it meant in the Old Testament. Not that the promises to the Israelites won't be fulfilled, because they will be. But now, the whole idea of being the chosen people has been reframed, and the apostles themselves are grappling with what this new thinking means. Now, what's happened to us 2,000 years is we've begun to take new thing thinking for granted, and we've somehow lost some of the effectiveness and the efficacy of, I can't even use that word, efficacy of grace. And it's become new thinking for us to get back to this idea of the power of grace and transformation and mercy and the completing and the progressive work of salvation. And so God is having us enter into this newness of life, and the whole idea of what it means to be a community of believers is being challenged again in us, and that's newness of thinking. But we can't enter into the new way of thinking until we've let go of the old way of thinking. Paul addresses this in Galatians, because the Galatian church probably is the best example we have of a church that had moved out of new thing thinking and back into Old Testament thinking. They had embraced Old Testament thinking over New Testament thinking, and Paul is actually calling them on a carpet for that. So let's just read this in Galatians chapter 3. Paul says, "Dear brothers and sisters, here's an example from everyday life. Just as no one can set aside or amend an irrevocable agreement, so it is in this case. God gave the promises to Abraham and his child. And notice that the scripture doesn't say to his children, as if it meant many descendants. Rather, it says to his child and to his children, as if it meant many descendants. Rather, it says to his child, and that, of course, means Christ. This is what I'm trying to say. The agreement God made with Abraham could not be canceled 430 years later when God gave the law to Moses. God would be breaking his promise. For if the inheritance could be received by keeping the law, then it would not be the result of accepting God's promise, but God graciously gave it to Abraham as a promise. Why then was the law given? It was given alongside the promise to show people their sins. But the law was designed to last only until the coming of the child who was promised. God gave his law through angels to Moses, who was the mediator between God and the people. Now, a mediator is helpful if more than one party must reach an agreement. But God, who is one, did not use a mediator when he gave his promise to Abraham. Is there a conflict then between God's law and God's promises? Absolutely not. If the law could give us new life, we could be made right with God by obeying it. But the scriptures declare that we are all prisoners of sin, so we receive God's promise of freedom only by believing in Jesus Christ. And this is the power of, this is the center of New Testament, new thing thinking. That it is by faith you are saved, not by works. And so whenever the church goes back into making works the basis of people's salvation, we have a problem. Now, it's not that we shouldn't do works. Faith, by nature of its being in our lives, creates good works and creates freedom from sin. We can't say we have faith and yet live in sin. But that's not what the church tries so often to do is we try to establish righteousness before we establish faith. And faith must be the start of all righteousness. And that's New Testament thinking. That's new thing thinking. Faith must be the beginning of our doing life together. Why do we do life together? Because we are a people of faith, and faith creates community. It's a powerful thought. But if we have faith, we will be in community. Not building a faith-based community, not being a people of community and love and cohesiveness and unity is a sign of a lack of faith. How powerful is that thought? All right, that's what I have for you today. We'll continue this on Thursday when we meet again. God bless you and be at peace.